Hey guys, it's Albert. I want to talk to you today about video frame rates. I know, exciting stuff. Well, it is to me, at least. There is a debate that is going on right now about what the best frame rate is to have. Now, for many, many years, for those of you who are not part of this debate, and that's the vast majority of you, film was shot in 24 frames per second and sometimes in 30 frames per second for certain applications. And in more recent years, people said, you know what? If 30 frames is good, more frames will be better. Let's get twice as many frames. Let's go to 60 frames a second. Now, this is only my opinion, and there are many people who disagree, not least among them James Cameron. But I feel like that 60 frames a second does not look as good as the 30 frames a second that we're used to in movies. Now, why is that? Some people say that it's because we're steeped in the 30 frames a second, we're used to what it looks like, the 60 frames looks weird. If we would just get out of the old way of doing things and be ready to go forward into the future, we could accept the 60 frames. And maybe there's some truth to that. But I was watching a TV show the other day that employed this, and it was very jarring to me because it seemed like it switched back and forth from one frame rate to the next. And in the 60 frames a second, I noticed that it looked more like actors on a set than when I was looking at the lower frame rates in the same TV show. And here's why I think 60 frames a second doesn't look as good to me. 60 frames a second doesn't look as good because it looks better. Now I want you to don't stay with me now. 60 frames a second looks better in theory. It looks more like what our eye perceives. When we look out at the world, we see the world in a much higher frame rate than 30 frames or 60 frames or any number of frames. But in a movie, when you get closer to the way the eye perceives, you're getting farther from that effect that a movie has. Let's call it movie magic. And I don't think it's just found in the frame rate either. There is a push in our era to make movies look more and more realistic, to make them look more like the reality that we see when we look out through our eyes. And I think, and I argue here, that that is a mistake. There is something special about the way a movie is captured. How is a movie captured? It's captured with the camera. Cameras have lenses, and back in the day they had film. The film is only able to go through at a certain rate, so we have limited frame rates. All of these things are, to one way of thinking, artificial. They're artificial constraints, and if we could do away with the camera, how wonderful would it be for movies and film to just be able to have some theoretical, non-existent, non-tied down corporeal thing that is a camera. But I think that much of what we see in the movies is not hindered by the camera, it's rather created by it. The camera isn't just the tool that facilitates us seeing things the way that the movie filmmaker wants us to see it. The camera is part of the way that we see those things. Everybody likes to make fun of J.J. Abrams for his overuse of lens flares. But lens flares are an important part of the cinematic language. And you know what? You've never seen one with the naked eye. You've never gone out of your house into the bright sun and seen a lens flare. That is something you will only ever see in films, and it is a flaw. It is a flaw in the way that the lenses reflect the light of the sun when they get too close to sunlight. Similarly, film, which many people are bemoaning the loss of, is great in part because of its flaws. People talk about the feel of film. One of the things that film has that digital doesn't is that grain, that chemical feel, because it's a literal chemical physical process of the light reacting with an actual physical thing and exposing it. Even today, in the era of the digital filmmaker, many directors are still going and getting much older lenses to use on their digital cameras. Why? It's because the older lenses weren't as good, quote unquote. They had flaws. Newer lenses are much better. They're much more finely machined. They give you a much better picture, and that sharper picture takes away something from the film. It has its place. It's good to have in your tool bag, but there is something in those flaws, in the very minute variations in focus, in the human element. The tools that we use to make these movies are an important part of the movies themselves. And rather than be in the mindset of, if only we could make the tools be more like real life, we should embrace that. We should celebrate the fact that the tool is part of the process, that the camera is as much a part of what makes the movie great as the actors or the set or the lighting. The camera and the lenses and all of those things are an important part, and even the flaws, even the problems that the camera introduces have become part of our cinematic language. And while it may be interesting technologically to try to reduce those problems, it's a mistake to turn our backs on them and say that they're bad things for movies. That's how I feel anyway. If you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more like it, hit subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments.